What I'm doing here today is I'm telling you some things, very practical things about the use of violin, viola or electric violin in electro-acoustic context. My PhD research is actually on a slightly different topic. It's about the holistic view of the creative potential of performance practice in contemporary music, because I thought as a performer I've realized that from the moment when I commission compositions to the moment when I'm on stage, I can have quite a big influence on what is conceived by the composers and the way how it's, if we have really intensive collaborations, I sometimes have quite an influence on the composition itself. In the practicing process, I also discuss the piece with the composers, and sometimes we find practical solutions for problems, sometimes we find artistic solutions for problems, sometimes new ideas arise, and it even happened that we changed the instruments that I recommended, take a different instrument, and the piece might be really completely different. And then comes the phase where I collaborate with the venues, sometimes to a less extent, sometimes very intensively, and it's about programming and about what to offer, which venue, what kind of venue I play in, and what kind of music could fit there and could fit the audience, and in which order to put pieces so that each piece can blossom within a program that can be extremely important. And in the end, I ended up with thinking about what is concert aura, what creates a concert aura, what is charisma, and so I did a lot of research on that. And kind of byproduct was the question about the use of violin, viola, or electric violin in electroacoustic context. As you can see, as I've written, the use of one or the other instrument is determined by its acoustic properties, which are really different. You have two different beasts if you have an electronic instrument or if you have an acoustic instrument. The requirements of the electronics, sometimes it's the musical or the content of the piece, the actual content, like the concept, like with Marco's piece, where there is a concept, very clear topic. Sometimes that calls for a different instrument, and sometimes it's just the different microphone techniques and the violin and the electric violin which cause advantages or disadvantages for a piece. And I will now just show you from each of those three, just one, because the other pieces I will talk about in more detail. Something which might be really interesting is with an electronic violin, you don't hear the acoustic sound. So if I play, it's completely subtle. It's like an electric guitar. If you play an electric guitar, it's not meant to be played unamplified. You always have to use loudspeakers, and the same applies with electric violin. So you don't have you don't hear in the audience the actual acoustic sound of the electric violin because it's too soft. And one of the big advantages is that in the processing, you can make the tone come and disappear again. At the beginning of what you heard from Marco's piece, Alias, you had this sort of rattling sound, like some really uninterrupted sound, but I was just doing one long bow stroke. And this is something you can do with an electric instrument, but you can't do it with an acoustic instrument, because obviously the acoustic instrument sounds by itself, will always cover the gaps in between. So this might be one of the requirements of the electronics, might be a reason for using the one instrument or the other one. Another one is, for example, acoustic properties. I'll play you an excerpt from Aleida Moreno. She's a Mexican composer. Night Music, that was a piece for my ensemble for saxophone, electric violin, electronics, percussion and piano. Aleida wanted to build a sort of dreamy atmosphere, and she decided to use the electric violin. In the beginning I thought, why does she do that? It's not really obvious to me. But then I realized that the electric violin and the sound of the saxophone is actually quite similar. If you play with the saxophone is always loud, is really, really loud. You can hardly make it soft. And acoustic violin is always so much softer than a saxophone. That's a problem. And with an electric violin, you can crank up the volume as much as you want, almost. So you can have an equal balance between both instruments. So the electric violin is more nasal a little bit. It is a little artificial, which is something you should know if you use an electric violin to work with. Don't expect an acoustic violin. I had that sometimes that composers said, okay, let's try the electric violin, and they said, it doesn't sound nice. It's just a different beast. It's like with acoustic guitar and electric guitar, nobody would expect the same instrument. It's two different instruments, and the same happens with electric violin and acoustic violin. Yannis Kyriakidis, for example, he's a composer from here, from Cyprus, and he has written a piece for me which is called Real Man Masters, and it's about a ritual which people in Africa had. It was a ritual against the colonial rulers, you could say. It's like a feast they had once a year where they celebrated and where they made mock of the colonial rulers, and where they also danced themselves in trance. And Yannis said he would like to use a mix of two instruments, of the acoustic violin and of the electronic violin. And the electronic violin, it was a sort of symbol for changing the world from reality to the transcendental world, something like that. So I'm always on stage switching between both instruments, going back and forth between two realities, you could say. This is the electric violin. this could be a reason that you just want to emphasize two different worlds for using two different kinds of violins. And another one is, now we come to the acoustic violin. Sometimes it's as simple as that for example, the acoustic violin has got a hollow body, and the electronic violin has got the full compact body. And with Wolfgang Suppan in Violin and Mahler, he wanted me to knock on the violin, so he needed the hollow body of the violin and to get a little bit of resonance. And he combined this knocking with comb filters, which sound then like this.
Leicht und nichts und zu das spüren, was weich und Leder ist. Das Zügen mehr und mehr zu mehr.
So whatever was not noise was violin, just heavily processed. This is a piece where you can just use the acoustic violin. Also because of microphone techniques. If you have electric violin, you have usually piezo microphones, which are underneath the bridge and underneath the strings, and they work by capturing the swinging of the bridge or of the string. They are much less sensitive than a condenser microphone, which you would use for an acoustic violin. So you don't get all the subtleties, and if I would knock with my fingers on the end of the fingerboard on an electric violin, nobody would hear anything. It's just if I really use my bow or if I pluck the string, then I can get a resonance. But the good thing is I can really crank the volume up without having to fear feedbacks. It's no problems with that. With my DPA microphone, which I use for my acoustic violin, it can easily be that I get feedback, so you have to be much more careful and you have to have a much better sound technician for that, I guess. And but then it captures really nuances in sound, which the electric violin can't. I would like to introduce you to the piece by Sascha Demand, which is called Blenden. And the blend is for two kinds of electric violins. One is a tabletop electric violin, one is the one on the right side is just used in the normal way, just like you play the violin, and the other one is just lying in front of me on the table, and I use different gadgets to play on it. And Sascha really wanted to have all instruments I have. He said, okay, you've got two electric violins, I will use both. And then he said, you have an acoustic violin, oh great, let's use that too. And he wanted to find a combination for these instruments which would really blend together. And also he was inspired by his own improvising on the electric guitar. And when he uses the electric guitar, he always uses tabletop guitar, and he has different gauges with which he plays the guitar. So he wanted to combine the concept of the electric guitar with the violin, and also combine the feeling of a processed sound with a purely acoustic instrument. Well, he said he would like to have a setup where one violin lies just on the table and the other one I can pick up and play on it. And then I said, okay, the only problem is how do we combine these two different settings, and in between, in the interval in between when I lay one instrument down and grab the other, what do we do then? And I suggested to him maybe we could have a soundtrack, and the soundtrack was based on an improvisation I did on the acoustic violin. But the acoustic violin was prepared in a way that it really sounds like electronically processed soundtrack. an acoustic violin, and we use the guitar string which we interwove in between the strings, and then when you play on it with a bow it gets all these howling sounds. And he added, I think, I don't know, he said it's like 2 string quartets which are playing on top of each other, so he must have had different layers of my improvisation which he put together to this soundtrack. That Karl-Heinz is really experienced in electronic instruments, and I was really curious what he would write for me, and he said, yeah, well, that's really interesting and I really want to do that, and collaboration is brilliant. And then we had a meeting in Vienna, and then it turned out he had already composed the piece. It was almost finished, and he didn't use the electric violin, he used the acoustic violin, so I was a little disappointed. No collaboration, no electric violin, it was all, well, anyway. And then we started to work on the electronics, and Karl-Heinz uses a sort of canon in his electronics. So he records what I'm playing on the acoustic violin, then he records it, and then he lets it through, it's in a buffer, and I can trigger it so that it is recalled again. It's really like a canon, only that in the processing the canon changes slightly. We tried it, and I thought it's an okay piece. Not too bad, not too interesting, it's just a little bit boring. That's what I thought, because I thought, okay, you hear the topic once, you hear the theme in the violin, then it runs through the loudspeakers, and then you have the feeling of a doubling effect. It's almost the same, it's not quite the same, and the sound is slightly less interesting because it comes through the loudspeakers, and so it takes away from the richness of the acoustic violin. Even if you really amplify it really very, very well, it's still a different, but not different enough to make it interesting. It's just sort of like a little worse double of what you heard before. So I asked him if he would like to switch to a different instrument, to the electronic violin, and he said, oh, yeah, I don't know. And then I tried his one, which is the one in blue over there, which is really, it was really a horrible instrument, and it sounded horrible. And then I said, okay, let's try it with my violin, and something really interesting happened. Just because the electronic violin runs through the loudspeakers, it changed the whole piece, because you had the same sort of sound, you had the same sort of sound in the beginning and in the canon. So it didn't feel like doubling, but it felt like it was one morphing thing, and that was much nicer. So as you can see, you can't differentiate anymore if it's from me. If you wouldn't see it, you wouldn't know if I'm playing live or if it's from the electronics. So we have different kinds of electronics which we can use. We can use pure amplification, we can use tape, we can use live electronics, like we just heard with Essel. Also the piece by Marco Siciliani, which you heard before, the Alias, is also with live electronics. Although the live electronics are happening so fast, yeah, they are triggered so fast that yeah, we were thinking, well, should I do it with a foot pedal? Should I just trigger the live electronics always with my pedal? Or should we have it as an automated live electronics in the logic file? And we decided that, and then we had to work with click because I really had to be rhythmically completely on top of it. With Essel, the piece you just heard, it's different. You can use live electronics completely without click because it's so free, and the live electronics react more on me and on my input. You can also have motion sensor, which is a piece I will show you later, which is also a piece which I will show tomorrow. Yeah. So I'll go first to amplification by Malozzi. That's a piece which is a bit strange because you take it's called For the Record, and it's actually dedicated to the record player. So now record player gets more and more in use again, but there was a time in between there was hardly anybody had a record player anymore. But it's been running in 3 different speeds, 33 and a third, I think, 45 and 78. Those are the 3 speeds of the record player. And what I do here, it's a conceptual piece. What I do here is I have the bow, which is just placed on the floor or on a table or something like that. And this is my record, actually. And there is a microphone just on the heel, and it's a microphone on the top of the bow. And we usually pan the microphones. One is really right and one is really on the left side. And then I take my violin and I scratch the violin like it was the needle of the record player on the bow. And then I try to find different timbres, and then you can hear the loops and the circles of the record. And I use the 3 different speeds. I go 33 and a third, and I go a little faster and even faster. And while I'm doing that, I try to find as many different timbres as possible on the violin. Of course, this is a little scratchy and a little squeaky, but I really like it. And by the panning of the microphones, the result is that if I'm playing really on the bottom of the bow, you will only hear it from one side. If I'm going to the top of the bow, you will hear it from the other side. And if I really use big circles, then it's just jumping from here to there and I'm back. So it sounds a little like this. Because the electric violin doesn't have these different kinds of timbre and overtones and squeaky material as the acoustic violin has. And it's really a piece for amplification, because the amplification really works like a sort of acoustic microscope on the sound. If I wouldn't have the amplification, it wouldn't make any sense at all. With the amplification, I can go in really different shades of timbre, and I can use little knocks, like when the record needle comes to the end and then always knocks against the paper. I don't know if you remember that. So I can really find different colors which wouldn't be possible without amplification and which wouldn't be possible on an electronic violin. Weapon of choice is a piece which works with motion sensor and also an amplified acoustic violin. And yeah, it uses the programming max MSP and jitter in 2 different ways. I have the motion sensor on the heel of my bow, and with the motion sensor I can, well, I improvise, and the improvisation, a short bit of the improvisation is being recorded and it's in a buffer in the computer. And then with the motion sensor I trigger this buffer so it runs again and runs through a certain kind of processing. It could be a delay processing, so it repeats itself again and again, or it could be distortion, or it could be reverse, so the improvisation will be played back reverse. And with the way how much I tilt the bow, I get different shades of processing, sometimes more, sometimes less. The speed can change, for example, from the reverse player. If I keep the bow up, then the speed just stays there and I just stay on one tone. And the moment I tilt the bow more, the speed increases, and you hear what I improvised before, you hear it backwards. The more the bow is tilted, the faster it goes. Yeah. And what he wanted to do is to enlarge the movement of a violin. He said the violin playing is in itself very, very expressive, and the bow is where you have most of the movements, and he wanted to enlarge those movements and make it part of the game, actually. And so what he also did is, not only do I trigger the processing and can I influence the processing by the way how I move the bow, but I'm also captured from a camera from front. And the camera captures my picture, my image, and captures the movement of my arm and transmits it into image, an abstract image on the screen. And that looks like this. Hitting the bow, I trigger the motion sensor and I get chords then. In each part of this piece, it's a little different. I know what's happening. The movements I have to do is always the same. I have quite a quick movement to trigger something or to stop something, and I can, as I said, I can tilt the bow. I'm around different axes to get different results. So this is a piece which is really about live electronics, in the sense that whatever I do there, it reacts, the electronic really react on me, and I really can use it as an instrument, which is quite pleasant and quite rewarding. You don't always have that. Sometimes composers say, oh, yeah, I do this beautiful live electronics, and then you get something and it's not reacting fast enough, or you can't really influence it, but they are really proud of it. One final thing which I would like to add, because all these pieces I had done in the PhD research, and most of the pieces, or I think all the pieces you will hear tomorrow night, have been done in collaboration with composers. And in the beginning, when I started my research, I had no idea what collaboration is. I just thought if two people work together and have a joint aim, then that's enough. But then after a while, sometimes I really felt exploited, and I really felt like I'm their violin machine who has to record things for the composer. Then the composer goes home and does all the interesting work and comes back and says, oh, please play that for me, record that for me, and then they go back again and do all the creative stuff, and I'm just the recording machine. So I had really beautiful collaborations also, but I realized that a collaboration needs more than just time together. So these are my rules now. Establish a goal that provides a focus, and it's not only about the piece, but it's also about what would you like to achieve together as a team. Would you like really to share work, creative work, or would you rather do things at home, which is perfectly fine, but then you don't really need the performer to collaborate. The next thing is listen closely, concentrate on each other and be committed. This sounds ridiculous in a way because you would think that that's what's usually done, but you would be astonished how many collaborations there are where people don't listen to each other and they are actually not interested in your opinion. They are just so much about their own opinion and their own work that then it's fine if they just work on themselves, I think. Another really important thing for me now as a performer is strive for equal participation. It is still a little bit the concept of creativity is done something which the lonely genius does at home, at least in music. It's not so much if you go in the film industry, for example, or it's completely different because it's so complex that people know, or in theater also, it's quite complex and people know they can't work, they can't do everything on their own. So they say, okay, you do the, I don't know, stage, you do the costumes, you do this. We all work together, but we have an equal participation. And the last thing, blend egos, but feel in control. Meaning that it's not always about you, it's not always about me, but it's about having two different egos or let's say personalities and blend them together. But the moment you feel that you lose control in a collaboration and that you give up yourself too much, then it's not a collaboration anymore. It's when somebody is taking over, and either that's fine for you, then okay, but it's just not collaborative work. That's all. Thank you very much.